made a wish upon a star. I could have a brand new car. Got tired of wishing, so I stole one. 17 and knew it all. My dreams were big, but my thoughts were small. So many roads, somehow I chose the wrong one. But Jesus and Mom always loved me, even when the devil took control. Jesus and Mom always loved me. This I know. I felt trapped most all my life. Found new kinds of lows and highs. Never been a husband, but I've had a lot of wives hold me. Headstrong, stubborn, couldn't be told. Like a wild horse that couldn't be rode. Rainbow chaser, hungry for gold, and still searching. But Jesus and Mom always loved me, even when the devil took control. Jesus and Mom always loved me. This I know. I wish Mom could see me now. I've turned it all around. Lately I've been going down the right road. Life's a picture that you paint with blues and grays, cans and cans. Heaven knows I'm not as faint, but I know Jesus and Mom always loved me, even when the devil took control. Jesus and Mom always loved me. This I know.
Good evening and welcome to the Christian Truckers Network. This is a ministry that welcomes guest speakers to share their testimonies as well as the Word of God as the Holy Spirit leads. If you would like to be a participant, you can call in at 641-715-0689. Then they'll ask for an access code, and that is 863-397, and then the pound sign. Again, that number is 641-715-0689. The access code is 863-397, and then the pound sign. Well, I am very happy to have our guest speaker here with us tonight. A little bit different than what we normally are accustomed to. With different preachers coming and sharing the word, and others coming and sharing testimonies. tonight is our brother Bo. He's with Vigilante Truth. He owns Vigilante Trucking down in North Carolina. His ministry is dealing with human trafficking. And we all know or heard about it, but have we really thought about it? Have we really looked into it? As, I know myself, I have daughters. I have a couple granddaughters that are coming up. They're a little bit young right now to be out of range of their parents or whatever, but, we need to be very concerned about this. This is a personal, bringing it personally to us, because this is happening right there in each and every one of your neighborhoods. So with that being said, I would like that you would all just pay real close attention to what is being spoken here tonight. And I want you to really meditate on this. So, Brother Bo, enlighten us to what's going on around us.
Well, thank you first and foremost for allowing me the opportunity to share God's heart for ending trafficking in the United States. And it's just truly an honor to be able to speak with you tonight and get this message out. I guess from your introduction, I'm going to, since I have a little bit of time, maybe give a testimonial and then do a little preaching. And in the meantime, throughout that, educate everybody listening as to the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, as well as the fastest growing enterprise in our country, our states, and our cities. And that would be faster growing than drugs and guns and internet fraud. I mean, truly, the fastest growing criminal enterprise right now is human trafficking. So it's a dark subject. I try to keep it as light as possible. If I ruin someone's dinner hour tonight, I apologize in advance. And if I ruin your breakfast appetite tomorrow morning, I also apologize in advance. It's a very serious issue, but at the same time, you can find joy in anything, and the joy I find is in the restoration of both the victims and the men that are consumers of those victims. So that's where we'll start with it. For me, I think I was like 99.9% of the people who will listen to this message. 6-7 years ago, I knew nothing about trafficking, had heard the term, but when I would hear the term human trafficking, I would automatically relate it to drug trafficking, a smuggling of something across the border, and really the term human trafficking is a term that I don't even like to use. I think it misleads the general public into what's really going on in the United States and across the world. I like to use the term human slavery. It's not about, and this will probably be the biggest surprise, it's not about smuggling girls, especially when you're talking the trucking transportation industries. This is not we're loading up a truckload of Mexican females and bringing them across the border into California and then spreading them out through the country. And so as a trucking company owner, I'm involved in this to quit the smuggling of females across the border. It's not that at all. What it actually is human slavery here in the United States, and 80% of the victims being trafficked right now in our country are born in our country. So that's the reason I don't like to introduce that trafficking word. It's not across the border. It's already here. And, of course, you have the other 20% are people being brought in from other countries to meet the demand for services here in our country. But the focus really needs to be on your local Girl Scout, your local PTA mom. It's an all-age kind of problem. Your sisters, your daughters, your mothers. And we'll go into why that's true and why we need to be aware of it. But again, going back 6-7 years ago, I didn't know anything about it. I offered to meet with a wonderful couple, the wife, and they were in their early 30s, but the wife was a medical doctor, and she had walked away from her career, and the husband was a veterinarian. He had walked away from his career. And those two individuals, and I've not met any individuals like them since, had gone into the streets of Nicaragua and lived in the streets as homeless people along with the girls that were being trafficked in order to become entrusted by them, and were able to actually rescue 3 girls out and buy a cinder block house with a tin roof, and taught them to make jewelry and as a living. And it's a beautiful story. they had returned back to the United States to raise some money so that they could go back to Nicaragua. Both of, the husband was an American, and the wife was a Honduran-born national. But that was their heart. And so they had met with me for this hour for me to give them some business expertise on how to raise the money so they could return. Oddly enough, that particular day, that 1 hour lunch meeting that started at 12, it ended at 10 p.m. And during those 10 hours, I listened to two individuals who had walked out fighting trafficking in every, horrible condition, had witnessed every horrible thing, and were relating these to me. As I would ask a business question, I would receive a trafficking answer. And I've always said that God is a potter, and I've always visualized God working with me specifically. Maybe, he started out putting the handle on the vase on one side and decided to pull the handle off and put it around on the other side. And occasionally I get really repentant, so God has got to take me down to half a vase or put me back into a clay ball. But I can tell you, over those 10 hours, God just simply took me back to dust and recreated me totally over the next 3 days. I was so hollow at the end of that 10 hours. I had gone to the bathroom and thrown up during some of the stories. I had cried during some of the stories. I had wanted to kill traffickers during some of the stories. And then I just couldn't believe that Satan was that evil. I know it's a strange thing to say, but I think that we really forget what John 10:10 says to us, and that's that the devil comes to steal and kill and destroy. And I think sometimes, certainly here in America where things are a lot better than they are other places, we tend to forget that the devil really is out to kill us and destroy us and steal from us. And in trafficking, in sex slavery specifically, this is a place that the devil operates all three. He will steal the purity. He will destroy a life. And then he will kill. The 71% of victims that have been rescued out of trafficking are suicidal. There are 200 more times likely to die of suicide. The average lifespan of a sex-trafficked individual is 7 years. And while we're talking statistics, the average age of a sex-trafficked female in our country is 13. Now, I've personally met victims that are in their early 30s. I have personally met victims who started when they were 4. So it's disgusting top and bottom. But of the 500,000 girls that are being sex trafficked in our country, in the USA right now, the average age is 13. So you hear things like that, and it just rips you apart, and it should. And for me, it did. And I just took it before God and said, what do you want me to do? I was a multi-millionaire. I was running 9 different corporations at the time. I was an international developer. I had a lifestyle that people don't even dream about. And God told me at that point that I would be fighting trafficking the rest of my life, and I literally walked away from all 9 of those corporations. The meeting with that couple was a Tuesday. 3 days later, after no sleep and not eating, and just really searching out God's heart on this matter, I'm not experiencing a mental breakdown, but the Lord has called me to do something totally different. And so my testimony would end there with, I walked away from all that life. Within 12 days, I knew that my heart and passion would be fighting the demand of sex-trafficked individuals. Specifically, that's our niche at Vigilante Truth. And in the midst of that, I ended up with a trucking company. Had never been in trucking. Don't have my CDL still even to this day. But what I found out was that 50% of the consumer demand, the men that are actually purchasing sex with sex-trafficked individuals, not that they know that's the case, but that's the reality, 50% of the consumer demand are truck drivers. There's truck drivers on this call and that, that understand, there's a part to truck stops and rest areas that's just dark as it can be. And there are also plenty of truck drivers out there that, have crosses and fish on the bumpers of their trucks, and are some of the greatest in humanity. But that being said, it's the only business market in the United States where a girl is brought to that marketplace and offered for sale, in this case at a truck stop or a rest area. And so because the truck drivers are forced to be there for their 10-hour breaks every day, and they get bored and they're away from families and the lifestyle is what it is, and you get a young lady who knocks on the door asking for company. She's smiling. She seems to be willing. It seems to be consensual, although it seems to be prostitution. It's illegal, but it still is a money for transaction. So with that being said, the truck drivers are willing to be the consumer demand. And so I ended up with a trucking company so that I could be an authentic trucking company owner and speak into the lives of truck drivers so that I could effectually do my best to end 50% of human trafficking. So that's the long and short of how I found out about trafficking, how I got into trucking, and that was a little over 6 years ago. And we've just been walking out God's plan for this ever since. As far as giving an understanding, just a general awareness of what's going on in the United States, it is the fastest growing criminal enterprise, but what does that really mean? What it really means is there's $9.8 billion spent every single year to have sex with these victims, with these slaves. Now, I don't know if you've ever had $9.8 billion before, but that would be more money than all professional sports combined is spent on games and ticket sales, and all of that doesn't even add up to $9.8 billion. So that'll give you the size in the United States of America of the money and the marketplace that this is going on. I like to use an example while I'm talking about sports. I'm a Charlotte, North Carolina resident, and in Charlotte we have the Carolina Panthers, and whether you like them or not, on any given Sunday at 1 p.m., there will be 74,000 fans and about another 6,000 employees, so call it 80,000 people in that stadium. And I know for a fact if somebody were to do something terrible, drop a bomb at 2 p.m. in that stadium, and all 80,000 of those people lost their lives, not only would Charlotte hear about it, not only would the state of North Carolina hear about it, not only would the USA hear about it, but really worldwide would hear about it, and it would be talked about for years to come. And yet we have 500,000 young ladies, average age of 13, in our country that are going to be sexually assaulted, raped, have to perform a sexual act 10 to 15 times a day. 10 to 15 times a day, 365 days a year. And yet we don't hear about it. It's not on the news. Nobody likes to talk about it. That's the kind of thing that still gets me passionate, gets me angry, gets me frustrated. But that's the reality of where our country's at today. And that's the reality and the reason for me to be here talking to you guys tonight. So that's the USA, and for me, I've always on a preaching side and a sales side, I've always said you don't go across town to try to sell your product or spread your message if you haven't already talked to your neighbors. So my heart with God's always been, America's a pretty big mission field if you look close, and so God literally put me in a mission field to end trafficking right here in North Carolina, because North Carolina is the 10th highest state in ranking for sex trafficking in the country. And then Charlotte, here in North Carolina, is the 8th worst city for trafficking in the country. So it really gives me a nice devil's playground to go play in, and bring some light into the darkness. But so that's where I've been the last 6 years. That's the battle that I fight. I do travel around the country when invited. I like to work with different law enforcement agencies when invited. As an example of that, I was in Houston last year before the Super Bowl for a week working with Houston Vice, and gosh, they picked up over 400 guys leading into the Super Bowl. They were doing John Stings. So that's exceptional. But A lot of my what I'll call revelation learning has come in and around North Carolina and the Charlotte area, and I'll bring that back up as we're talking about supply and demand curves later on. But just remember that Charlotte's the 8th worst city in the country for sex trafficking. That would bring me to a coin that I keep in my pocket. Maybe you guys have some of these as well. A man gave it to me, and it's the armor of God, and so it's always a reminder to put the armor on every day. And I like to keep this coin in my pocket, and any time that I'm speaking on trafficking, I like to pull that coin out, and I just rub on it a little bit, and it reminds me of really what we're dealing with. And as I use this coin as an analogy, on one side of it is supply. And for me, as a businessman, everything becomes a product. And so in my mind, sex trafficking is a product, and that product is $9.8 billion a year. And so it's a great product. Everybody's enjoying it. And how is it then that most people are trying to affect supply, get it on the shelves? And so I'm just re-engineering my mental skill set to get the product off the shelves. So, but the supply is the girls, and the manufacturer is God, and the salespeople, the distributors, would be your traffickers, to keep the analogy going there. And then the thin edge of this coin, and it's about the size of a $50, but the thin edge of this coin is what I call rescue. Because we all want to hear about this, and then we want to get mad, and then we want to go kick down some doors and shoot some traffickers, and I understand that. It makes a whole lot of sense to me. But the reality of what's going on in our country is this little bitty thin edge is the amount of young ladies who are actually being pulled out. Less than 1%, less than half of 1%. In fact, in the United States of America last year, where 500,000 girls are being trafficked in our country, there was less than a couple of hundred that were rescued. Another thing to make you passionate and frustrate you a little bit about this issue. Then on the other side of this coin is the demand, and that makes up all the men, not the traffickers and not the pimps, not the handlers. Those three words are all synonymous. So not the people that are distributing and bringing these girls to the marketplace, but the men who are actually paying. So for every one girl who's being trafficked today, there's going to be 10 or 15 men who are her customers that are going to pay her anywhere from $20 for some kind of sex act, oral sex act as a good example, up to full intercourse, which might be anywhere from $150 to $1,500, depending on what type of young lady she is. So those are the three things that really make up this battlefield: the supply, the rescue, and the demand. Now, my heart is to see the supply, all these wonderful young ladies, restored to the kingdom of God, to be healed. As I said earlier, the average lifespan is 7 years for these young ladies, and if the average age is 13, you can realize that the average age of these girls when they're dying is 20. And that's through suicide. That's through drug overdose, which is simply them self-medicating the pain away. It's through physical beatings and literal, murder. And then lastly, it would be, disease, HIV, syphilis, and things like that. If left untreated, are still killing people. So, that's what we're up against. And I want to see these girls, all 500,000 that are out there tonight. I want to see them rescued. I want to see them restored. But let me tell you about how hard that is. One, we've talked about the few people that have to have a law enforcement to up that number, which would be budgets. And the financial constraints of that are enormous, and I can understand that. And until communities get aware of it, they're not calling their politicians to get any kind of monetary money set aside. So until the public gets upset, cares enough, call somebody, those people call somebody to call somebody, and finally the police force is told to go out and do something. And I'm speaking local police force. The Homeland Security and FBI do a pretty good job given the circumstances. But your local law enforcement just is really not up on this at all. So if they are to rescue a girl and she's brought in, there's less than 300 beds nationally for a sex trafficked victim. So we'd be way shy if we rescued all 500,000 girls today. And it's one of the reasons this edge is so thin. Even here in Charlotte, there's only 12 beds for victims. All 12 of those beds are full. So if I take my team out tonight and our hotline rings and we go and are able to facilitate some kind of rescue of a young lady, we don't have anywhere to put her. Literally, we have nowhere to put her. So that's just another reason that edge is so thin. But that's also the reason why we need to be very careful of focusing just on the supply. Right now, 99.9% of all the organizations in our country are focused on the rescue of these girls, and once they are actually focused on once they are rescued, on focusing on housing them and getting them assistance. And I would tell you, on average, each one of these girls to be able to facilitate any kind of real restoration is about $100,000 a year. A girl who's been trafficked, her PTSD is greater than a returning war veteran. She's going to most likely have a drug addiction, and so she's going to need treatment for that. She very well is going to have medical issues that are going to need to be treated, whether they were from physical abuse, sexual abuse, disease. She very well could have children. Children are used to blackmail girls all the time, as in a, you will do this or I will hurt this child. You will do this or I will have the child do it. You will do this or I will just do something terrible to the child, and something terrible to the child could even be killing the child and selling the child's organs on the black market. So just a whole lot of power in what the traffickers have done to the mental and emotional and spiritual parts of these humans. And so it's just really difficult. We don't have the resources to take care of these girls now, but as I move forward, hear my heart correctly, I would die for every one of these girls, whether I know them or not. My heart, God's heart, is for their total restoration, but most days I wake up, I see that as an impossibility. Unless the Creator is going to come with a big plan second to Jesus coming back, I just don't know how we're going to be able to get those girls rescued and then restored. A drug rehab, we're going to put somebody in drug rehab for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks if they're really out there. You're going to spend anywhere from 4 to 5 years with a sex trafficked victim to get that victim capable of going to the supermarket by themselves without having a PTSD issue and looking over their shoulder. You just don't reintroduce these young ladies back to society in the way you would with other issues. So big mountain to climb, and I appreciate all the organizations across the country that are doing something. But for those of you who are just hearing about trafficking for the first time, and I can understand your heart is for these girls and you want to go out and help, I just want to point out the other side of that coin, that demand coin. And I like to start with a discussion on demand by just bringing up a college class. Whether you've been to college class or not, you're going to understand this. But it's the very first graph they show you in economics, and it's supply and demand. And what that means is the number of buyers will equal the number of the product that's on the market, and wherever that little point is, that's the number of people. So if there's 500,000 girls, which is the supply, that are being trafficked in America, it's only because there is a demand of men to have sex with these girls, and that's why that number is 500,000. If there was half the men that wanted to have sex with these girls, then the 500,000 girls would drop to 250,000 girls, if you get an understanding. So wherever the X is of the graph, that's where you're going to find the number of girls. So if it's financially impossible to rescue all these girls, and it's financially impossible to restore and have places for these girls, then what can we do to end trafficking? How can we affect the supply? And if I can break it down in the most simple explanation, it looks like this. If you have 10 men standing on the aisle in Walmart to buy 10 bottles of Tide laundry detergent, and we good-natured American citizens and church folk And community activists, we run into Walmart and we rescue 5 bottles of Tide off the shelves. And we take them away, and they'll never be used to do laundry. And we pat ourselves on the back, and we love on those bottles of Tide, and we give them a whole new life, and it's a wonderful life. That's awesome. But as we turned our back and ran out with those bottles of Tide, what we did not see was there are still 10 men standing in the aisle. And what happens with those 10 men is they go into a buying frenzy over the remaining 5 bottles. And so that buying frenzy is called a demand frenzy, and so demand will actually rise for the remaining bottles on the shelves, and that frenzy will drive up the price. So instead of it being a $10 bottle of Tide, it's now a $15 bottle of Tide, and 5 men are going to buy it at $15. 5 men are going to wait to buy at $15. And so what does that, on a business perspective, what does that do? Well, that has the distributors, in this case the traffickers, will replace the 10 girls on the shelf with 12 at the new higher price. It's called capitalism. That's how American products are bought and sold every day in our country. And I'm okay with that kind of capitalism every day in our country, except for when it involves selling humans. And so if we are only focused on the rescue, that's our only focus, then we're actually doing more harm than good. And so that certainly should add to the frustration of everything I've said tonight for you. So then the answer becomes, what do we do? And so I say, well, God, what do we do? And part of me saying, God, what do you want me to do as my own personal testimony? The reality is, God, what do we do? What does your kingdom army do here on earth? What do you want us to pay attention to? How can we not just join the battle of fighting sex trafficking, but how can we end trafficking? And that's what at Vigilante Truth, if you go to our website, you'll see that we always say we're going to end trafficking. We're not here to fight it. I mean, we are. We're in the trenches with it. We are fighting, but my goal, our goal, is to end trafficking. And I think that God's heart, not only for trafficking, but everywhere, is his heart is to end the darkness by bringing light. It's not to bounce light and darkness back and forth across the tennis court net, right? He's here to win. So how do we win? How do we take the frustration that I've talked about and really put it to use? And so the way to put it to use is to get men to quit buying. It's really quite simple. If men quit buying, if there's only 100,000 men buying, well, now you're down to 50,000 females, right, that are needed. And not that number's certainly too many, but at the same time, that number's less than 500,000. And so we're working our way to ending it. And so at Vigilante Truth, the trucking part, I talked about that earlier, and I'll bring some of these points back around. If we have 50,000 customers, 50% of the customers here in Charlotte, which is the 8th worst city in the country, how can we affect the demand there? What can we do? So I have put huge billboards on my tractors and my trailers, and blatantly says right across the top of the tractor, "Stop the selling of rape." So let's look at that statement, because I use the word rape, and I talk about the selling of rape, and I haven't used that word yet tonight, not in this first 30 minutes, but from here on out, you're going to understand this one point, and it's going to be very, very productive in countering demand. When a truck driver, we've done stakeouts in truck stops, and so I understand how this works. A truck driver pulls in, he parks, and a young lady will come up and knock on the door and ask if he wants any company, and if he says yes, she'll get in the truck with him. They'll have a sexual act and a transfer of money, and she'll hop out the passenger door and go knock on the next driver's door at the truck next to him. That driver, that man, that human man, he has put a value on that young lady of whatever that dollar bill was for her services. So if it's $20 or $100, that's what he's valued that young lady at. And I'm going to come back to value of females later. But what he thinks has happened is a consensual sexual business deal. She was smiling. He didn't hit her. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't crying. When it was over, she, took the money. She might not have looked back. She might have thrown him a middle finger. Who knows at that point? But the reality is he never had to hurt her in his mind. And she was doing the offering. She's the one that knocked on the door. She's the one that started the whole encounter. So how could he be guilty of anything? Even if he's just a single man with no kids, never been married, right? So what he doesn't understand is outside of that, and it reminds me of a 74-year-old trucker I was talking to, and he said, Bo, you're right. I remember this girl coming down. She was working truck to truck to truck. She had a big smile on her face, cute as a button. I don't know. She said she was 18, but she probably was only 16. But the point was, I've just never seen a salesperson work so hard as that girl did. And I said to him, well, here's what you don't know. You saw that. I said, but what you don't know is she has been threatened with her life, blackmailed with the life of her friends and her family and perhaps her own children. She's been beaten. She's seen other girls killed. So she understands it's a life or death thing. And so she's selling for all she's worth, because the reality is, if she doesn't make $1,000 that day, and that's the average quota for a sex-trafficked female in the country, the United States of America, is $1,000 a day she has to make. And it doesn't matter whether it's a $20 encounter or a $100 encounter. She's going to have to return with $1,000 or risk death. And sometimes some of the things these girls describe to me are actually worse than death. They pray for death. So yeah, that turns him into a great salesman. And when I told the man that, he was just baffled. In fact, he had a tear come down his cheek. He said, I just never understood it was like that. And I said, well, let me make it even clearer for you, sir. I said, if you and I go to an apartment complex here in this town, and we knock on the door and a lady answers, and we smile at her, and we tell her she's going to need to smile, or we're going to hurt her, we're going to beat her, we're going to do whatever we threaten to do with her, and we take her back to her bedroom, we have sex with her, and we leave $100 on the nightstand, and we tell her to smile and be nice to us while we leave the apartment, I think we could all agree that would be rape by all definitions. And of course, that 74-year-old man, he just nodded his head. He said, you're absolutely right. And another tear came down his cheek. Now, I don't know his past or how he was involved in this sort of thing in the past, and we didn't discuss it. It didn't matter, because I was there to change his mind, change his heart. But what I needed him to understand is, just because a young lady knocks on the door of your truck and gives you the excuse that she's, I don't know, putting herself through law school, paying for a drug habit, rent for a little bit of shelter for her children, whatever the lie is she's going to tell you, the reality is she's already been beaten and coerced and manipulated into that situation. And so effectively what you're doing is you're paying the pimp, you're paying the trafficker. Even though you give the money to her, 100% of that money is going to be given to the pimp. So you are paying the pimp, the trafficker, the handler to rape the girl. That's what's happening in America. Prostitution really no longer exists, and I'll get to that in a minute. But just know that the lot lizard no longer exists. What you see on the tarmac, what you see there in the parking lot, is a female who is a sex slave. And that sex slave that you give money to is going to give it to her pimp, and you're going to have effectually paid the pimp to rape the girl. Now, how does that matter? Well, it matters because most men I've met are not rapists. And even the lowest common denominator of our society, those who are in jail, when the fights break out in jail and the riots start, it's always the sex offenders, the rapists, that get, stabbed, shivved, beaten first. So even the lowest common denominator of our morality here in our country understands that rape is wrong. And so those men understand it, and really every man that I talk to understands it. And so what I have to do, and it doesn't take too terribly long, no longer than we've talked tonight, to explain to him that what he's taking part in is non-consensual. And if he continues to take part in it, no matter what lie that girl tells him that allows him to justify that it's going to be okay, the reality is always going to be 100% of the time. Let me change that, 99.9. In 7 years, I've met one consensual prostitute. The rest have all been trafficked. So I can't say 100% of the time, but what I am going to tell you is, and I do say it more often than not, 100% of the girls that are out there right now that are offering services are being trafficked. You will be raping them, and it's just that simple. So if you're a rapist, keep doing what you're doing. And by the way, yes, there are rapists, and no, this doesn't work for rapists, but the reality is rapists are raping. They are not paying for sex. So we're not even talking about rapists. We're just talking about men. And it's every man. It is not just truckers, and I get to pick on them because they make up the largest demand, but I pick on truckers a little bit because it allows me to give a wonderful victory story. Because my trucks that have VigilanteTrucker.com, it's a website that leads you to VigilanteTruth.com, the website that has all the videos and the education, and like I said, the tractor says stop the selling of rape. What actually happens when those trucks pull into a truck stop is the pimps see them. And the pimps will load the girls up and go away. So that truck stop, as long as my truck is parked there, becomes a no trafficking zone, which is amazing. Literally just stops it right in its tracks. It doesn't matter if the truck drivers in the other 100 trucks even know the truck's there or not. I mean, they're going to see it, and they might go to the website, and I might be able to educate somebody that way. But what's important is the traffickers see it. Because if you'll remember, those girls are making that trafficker $1,000 a day or $365,000 a year per girl. Average trafficker is going to have 3 to 5. So we're talking about a guy who's making $1 million, but more importantly, he's got a $365,000 asset. The girl, he doesn't view her as human, by the way. She's a product. She's an asset. And so the last thing he wants is his 3 or 4 girls that are working the truck stop, those assets, to be picked up by law enforcement. It's better for him just to disappear until that truck disappears. By the way, light always chases out darkness, doesn't it? God says it, and these trucks live it. They pull in. There's so much light and so much anointing. In fact, one of the visions I've gotten is there's always a angel, huge angel, sits on the hood of every one of my trucks, straddles the front grill area. He's got a big sword, and he just holds it, and he just sits up there. That's what I always see when I see my trucks pulling in places. Do my drivers, are they trained up? Yeah. Is that part of working for me? No. Do they all want to know about this and be a part of it? Yes. Have we rescued females out of truck stops using our trucks? Yes, we have. So we have great success stories there. But the greatest success is this. If I park my 10 trucks at all of the 10 truck stops that make up the Charlotte area, within a 30-mile radius of downtown Charlotte, there's 10 truck stops. So I park my trucks there 24/7, 365. Understand that I will have absolutely ended 50% of the trafficking in the 8th worst city in the country. Is that incredible or what? See, that's God comes up with plans like that. Nobody shoots at me. I didn't rescue anybody. I didn't try to steal a 365 asset from a pimp. And if you want to get into a gunfight, that's the quickest way to do it. I mean, my goodness, most of us that are going to be listening to this, if somebody comes into our family room and tries to steal our $350 big screen off the wall, yours might be $500 and bigger than mine, but we're going to shoot them dead, leave them in the living room. And actually, there's a law that says we can do that. So just imagine how you would fight for a $365,000 TV on your wall if somebody came in and tried to take it. So, the gunfight, while we want to, is not necessarily the smartest way. The smartest way is to make sure that no trafficking can exist, and we can do that by fighting the demand. So as the truck stop breeds out, we've got no trafficking happening while it's there. We have other drivers that are getting educated.